Is this better? Yes, now I can hear myself. Hi, welcome everybody. That was an exhilarating session that we just completed with Jerry Pinto really sort of embodying the spirit of worship and devotion and bhakti. I am now inviting you to a very different kind of session, which is equally sensual, equally much of the body, because we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk to, three writers who have been writing about how certain tastes, certain flavors, certain scents live in the body and in a way inhabit us, and they're always bringing back memories, you know, memories of things that we have experienced. I want you to just try and remember the last time you unexpectedly smelt something or tasted something that immediately brought back a memory that you thought you'd forgotten. I remember that happened to me because very recently I had to switch from the normal rice that I eat to a different kind of rice because that was medically recommended. And I had no idea. I'm not a cook. I don't know much about food. I mean, except that I love eating it. And I didn't know that these different kinds of rice would have any kind of different effect on me. But when that fragrance of that rice cooking suddenly started coming up, I suddenly remembered my grandmother's house. And not just a house, I remembered the meals, I remembered the fun we used to have as cousins. It was like unlocking a pathway to a whole world. And that's what I want to talk to these three writers about. And I'm going to first invite them to each of them talk about a little bit about their book and to read from it and to tell us so we know what the books are about, and then we can carry on with the discussion. So who would like to start? Tabinda, why don't you begin?
Hello. So first of all, I'd like to thank Anjum Katyal.
Is that working?
Is that
Can you hear her? Yes, you can.
Okay. The director of the Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival and everybody who's helped to organize this. I'm really grateful. It's wonderful to be here today and see lots of familiar faces in the audience. And I'm looking forward to lots of lively and interesting discussions about food today. Food is deeply intertwined with nostalgia. A particular smell, even a faint whiff sometimes, has the ability, like you said, to magically transport one to a time and place in one's past, evoking a plethora of memories. In my book, Fabulous Feasts, Fables and Family, I write about the aroma of crispy, caramelized, thinly sliced onions, fried gently in pure ghee, nestling over a mound of steaming khichdi. The intensely savory and spicy and pungent notes and flavors of a platter full of freshly fried shami kebabs with rings of raw onion alongside, and the sweet fragrance of a bowl of sivaiya with its milky sweetness combined with the headiness of keora and cardamom. These wonderful smells and flavors evoke those fun-filled days of childhood with meals, convivial meals with the extended family, sitting on a chowki around a dastakhan. For those who don't know what a dastakhan is, it's a piece of fabric, a special fabric, around which people used to sit cross-legged and eat. So sitting around a dastakhan, sometimes an unpleasant smell of a particular dish may belie its incredible flavor and goodness. Case in point being the shaljam ka achar. So it's a humble achar. It's a water-based but very fiery pickle that's made with turnips. Opening the lid of the achar urn assails one's senses with its intensely sour, fermented smell that has been likened by some to old socks. But Get past that, and it's a sublime addition that perks up many a dreary winter meals. In the olden days, at wedding feasts, it was customary for the celebratory meals to be cooked in huge dails, which are cooking vessels outside homes. The tantalizing aromas from the biryani, the korma, and all such decadent and elaborate dishes could be smelt from several streets away. And even today, they are reminiscent of the flurry of excitement and the glee that marked those joyous days. Similarly, the drama that surrounds opening a pot of gulatti, which is a decadent and really dreamy dessert that's served in weddings in the Aligarh area. The first bite and you're hooked. It's unlike anything in this world. The earthy aroma of semolina or suji being gently roasted on a low heat in preparation of suji ka halwa could be for blessings or prayers or festivities is another evocative smell for me. The freshly pounded cardamom seeds, the pure ghee, and the final sprinkling of desiccated coconut all transport me magically, even today when I prepare this halwa in my London kitchen using the same method that my mother, grandmothers, and aunts used. These exceptional smells, though simple and perhaps trivial for some, connect me instantly to that carefree time in my childhood and youth when these dishes were prepared with great love and care by those who are no longer with us. In a way, these smells and flavors link me to those joyful days and keep the legacy of those wonderful women alive. I end my talk with this beautiful sher or couplet by an Urdu poet who had a great affinity and love for this wonderful city. And the poet is Mirza Ghalib. So I'm going to recite his sher now. सब कहाँ कुछ लालाओ गुल में नुमायां हो गईं, खाक में क्या सूरतें होंगी जो पिन्हा हो गईं. So the translation, some, not all, manifest themselves as beautiful flowers. What faces would have been hidden in the dust? Thank you.
Thank you, Tabinda. I hope all of you aren't going to make a beeline for the closest restaurant after all those wonderful, evocative descriptions of food. But that, when she was reading aloud, I was thinking that it's exactly the point that she was making, that it's not just the perfume of the smell, which is something which Divrina writes about also beautifully. The perfume of the food smells in themselves may be lovely, but more than that, it's all the associations. You can actually remember people, remember incidents, and you sort of go back into a different reality. So your book, Fabulous Feasts, Fables and Family, it's a book in which you are revisiting your family memories and life and growing up and centering it around the meals, right? Around the special dishes.
Yes.
Which you identify with different members of your family.
That's exactly right.
Right. So it brings to life a whole way of living, which many of us will probably never see anymore. And this was based in Aligarh?
So this is based in Aligarh, and what I wanted to do was write about my various aunts who cooked a particular dish to such excellence and to such perfection that that dish came to be associated with that particular aunt.
Yes.
So it's in a way I'm paying tribute to them, and it's also keeping their legacy alive.
That's right. And also what's interesting about the book is that she's also talking about the customs and the rituals and the occasions, you know, whether it's an Eid dish, or it's a wedding feast, or it's you know, something associated with winter breakfast. So, you know, and she's at the same time as we learn about the foods and the recipes and the dishes and the people, we also learn about the customs and the lifestyle. So thank you. Let's move on to, since you also deal with food, before we move on to the perfume. Tarana, would you like to share something from your book?
Yes, so actually I am from Rampur, which maybe a lot of people don't know about. And when I moved back to Rampur, my journey began because, like Tabinda, I realized that, it was the flavors that had just gone missing. And I was an insider, outsider, and a lot of things were changing around me. The 10 gates of Rampur were being torn down. And then I was just looking for something to cling on to. And thus began my journey of reviving the Rampur cuisine, because food is something that we can easily make our own, and well, not so easily, but we can kind of revive it. So my work is on forgotten foods, and my book, which is an anthology of forgotten foods, which writes about Muslim South Asian cuisine and the forgotten foods from Muslim South Asian cuisine, which I have co-edited. I would like to just read a small extract from that. It's called Separated at Birth, Rampur and Bhopal Cuisines. Mama's reason for the impromptu Bhopal trip were, in her opinion, perfectly sensible. She had to get away somewhere before a possible COVID third wave. She might die without visiting an important former princely state. With her roots in Rampur, another erstwhile Nawabi territory, because my mother belonged to Rampur also, which is a erstwhile Nawabi place, Mama has a penchant for historical places and crumbling Nawab-era royal earrings. I ranted, I argued, and I gave wild excuses. The parents' emotional invite had the effect of reducing a rational middle-aged woman to a whining teenager. You can study Bhopal's cuisine. You will like it once you are there, remarked she who must be obeyed, as she reeled me in. Resigned, I started reading up on Bhopal and realized that the common Pathan culinary roots shared by Bhopal and Rampur could make a fascinating study. Kamar, my travel enthusiast husband, also decided to join us. Thus, armed with 2 extra sets of discerning Rampur taste buds, I started feeling excited about my gastronomic holiday. Bhopal and Rampur were both princely states, semi-independent kingdoms under British imperial suzerainty, and shared the common Afghan Pathan cultural ethos. The Nawabi Principality of Bhopal traces its establishment to an Afghan chieftain, Dost Muhammad Khan, in 1724. Rampur was also founded by an Afghan chieftain, Faizullah Khan, who established the state 50 years later in 1774. The chieftains with their families, allied tribes and soldiers brought their Pathan traditions with them as they settled in the 2 geographically diverse regions. Interactions between the 2 states were regular, as attested by letters from Nawab Sultan Jahan Begum of Bhopal writing to Nawab Hamid Ali Khan of Rampur. Around the mid-19th century, and especially after the 1857 rebellion, the cooks and artisans from the fallen states of Delhi and Awadh had found refuge among and sponsorship from the Nawabs of Rampur. This had led to an era of culinary integration and innovation in Rampur, where Awadhi and Mughal cuisine granted an elegant sheen to the rustic Afghan Pathan Rampuri foodways. Bhopal's cuisine was also introduced to Awadhi cooking styles when the 3rd Begum of Bhopal, Nawab Shah Jahan Begum, employed cooks from Lucknow in the royal kitchens. I'll skip a little bit and we'll come to, we stayed at Jahanuma Palace Hotel in Shamla Hill. The hotel belongs to the descendants of Nawab Sultan Jahan Begum's 2nd son, Nawab Muhammad Ubaidullah Khan, and is known for its preservation of heirloom recipes of Bhopal's Nawabi cuisine. I was especially intrigued by 2 new dishes with exotic and unusual names, the Rizala and Filfora. Rizala I first tasted in Kolkata, and it's an amazing dish. Rizala is a chicken or mutton preparation known for its subtle taste and aroma. It is a popular dish in West Bengal and Bangladesh, and there are several Bengali versions of Rizala, some using simple yogurt, poppy seeds, and cashew paste as the dominant notes, while others add turmeric and chili powders. I'm sure all of you have had risala, but I had it for the first time here. As no dish is found in no such dish is found in Avdi cuisine, credence seemed to attach to Bengali gourmand's claim that the dish was first created in Bengal. Oral history suggests that Bengali converts to Islam started cooking risala, a simple dish amalgamating the local flavors with Awadhi and Mughal cuisine after it was introduced by Mughal governors and later Wajid Ali Shah's establishment at Metia Burj. Sikandar Malik asserts that risala came to Bhopal when officials were hired from Bengal by the last two begums of Bhopal. Today, the dish is prepared only in West Bengal, Bangladesh and Bhopal. Nawab Shah Jahan Begum loved celebrations and royal events curated around color themes. Thus, Jashne Gulabi and Jashne Haryali celebrated in the colors of pink and green respectively. Everyone dressed in the given color, and the decor as well as the cuisine highlighted this tone. Thus, the dull beige Razala curry was granted coriander to make it green, and the Bhopali Razala was born. Thank you.
Wow, that really is an sort of tracing an interesting connection between the West Bengal and Bhopal. One wouldn't think that, given they were separated like that, that there would be that link in the food. Yeah, and these sort of unexpected connections keep coming up through the book as well, right?
Yes, because recipes are traveling everywhere and people are just mixing up the local flavors.
Right, yes. So, thank you for sharing your book with us. And what is the sort of the bigger project of the book? Are you also, like Tabinda, going back to your family, or is it you're looking at different kinds of South Asian foods?
So my project is called Forgotten Foods, and it is under the University of Sheffield and Arts and Humanities Research Council. Now this project looks at the forgotten dishes in various cuisine and the culinary memories, recording the oral histories.
Right.
So I'm basically studying the food history, but I'm also trying to revive the cuisine of Rampur particularly. Then when I was writing this, when we were collecting the articles for this book, I moved out of this culinary arrogance that all of us have, that our food is the best. So I moved out of that to connect with other food writers across South Asia, Muslim South Asian cuisines, which are being lost.
Right.
So this project is about talking about those cuisines that are being lost also.
Right. So fascinating, because in the book you have cuisines from Ladakh, you have cuisines from Sri Lanka, you have cuisines from very, very different places in South Asia, which are looking at these little communities which are holding on to their customs, or in some cases are losing these foods. Thank you. Let's move on to Divrina's book. Now, Divrina is coming to memory and the senses through a slightly different route, and that is the route of perfume. Perfume, again, like food, is, as she argues in her book, one of the oldest human civilization expressions or hungers, you know, sort of desires and hungers. And she locates the different kinds of roots and sources from which some of the most popular perfumes have come. Divrina, will you talk a little about your book, The Perfume Project, and also maybe read something from it?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have to pull you all out of that wonderful reverie because and tell you that I have not written about food and I cannot cook, so I don't go there. I'm going to, before I just launch into reading, I'm going to just preface this a little bit. We're here to talk about how our senses are connected to memory and how they can sort of link us to our pasts. And we sort of, that as human beings, we are completely sort of led by our senses. We're kind of just like sense-led meat sacks. And we give a lot of primacy to the visual, to the oral, and of course to taste. And you've heard some like wonderful passages from both Tabinda and Tarana about that. And I chose to write about fragrance, just to be difficult, no. Just to say that when we talk about a fragrance, it has a lot of, there's a lot of scientific research on why it is, despite the fact that I think it's the one sense that we pay the least attention to. And I think that's because it's involuntary. You breathe involuntarily, and so you're smelling equally involuntarily. And despite that, it's sort of the one sense that really can evoke memory in sort of the most immediate way. And when Tabinda read out the passage from her work, what she's talking about is something that is very commonly referred to when you read about fragrance, and it's called the Proustian effect or the Madeleine effect. And this is, of course, Marcel Proust, who wrote in his novel In Search of Lost Time. He wrote about this moment when he's eating this, a cake, a Madeleine cake that's dipped in linden tea. And that the moment that he tastes it, he is sort of thrown back to the place of his childhood. And he has a line that says something like, all of Cambrai arose from this teacup. And so that effect then became known as the Madeleine effect, which is essentially how a fragrance can involuntarily evoke a memory. And it may even be one that you sort of could not access prior to that moment. The research on this is that there's a reason that when you smell, you have these olfactory bulbs in your nose, and these are directly connected to the part of your brain that also processes emotion. So in fact, the sort of the landscape of the human brain is such that these areas that deal with scent or odor and deal with emotion are right next to each other. So so therefore you can't override that. So when I read out to you a little bit about my own association with a particular fragrance, indeed, when any of you have these associations, because I think all of us do, give whether it is your mother's perfume, whether it's something that you smelled in the kitchen, a cooking odor or anything at all, just to say that all of you are scientifically absolutely correct. So I'm just going to read out a little bit, which is in the beginning of a chapter I've written on vetiver, or khas, which is a very popular Indian fragrance, which is more typically North Indian. My first home in the city, in the Delhi of old, like most at that time, had no air conditioner. Later, one was installed in my parents' bedroom. And on particularly humid nights when a desert cooler was of no help at all, my sister and I were allowed to drag the mattress off our bed onto the floor in their room and sleep there. While this system worked well most of the time, there were the days when working an air conditioner seemed more than the poor weighed down electrical grid could endure, and flicking the switch on caused some kind of fault that left us with no electricity at all. Just a very still darkness. These nights were spent stoically with some amount of fretting and liberal lashings of bright yellow, oppressively citronella-scented Odomos mosquito repellent, of which we owned a family-sized tube. On some nights, however, the situation galvanized my father. While my mother chose to resignedly ignore the heat and sweat in silence, he would decide that a visit to the Delhi Electrical Supply Undertaking, which was just called DESU, it was just always called that, was in order to lodge a complaint and find out what the problem was. Or perhaps he just sought to speed the night along. If my sister and I were awake, we always went along with him. Those were exciting nights, heading out in the Maruti 800, still in our pajamas, windows rolled down, arriving at the DESU office. While my father joined the others there with similar grievances, we sat on the edge of the open window, legs inside the car, hands drumming tunes on the roof. Whether any of it led to the electricity being restored, I have no recollection. It seems by now beside the point. The memories of the summers past are what make me look forward to the season each year and try defiantly to enjoy the dry, shimmering heat, feeling just a little bereft as it segs into the monsoon, for then I know I must wait another whole year. We continued back then to largely rely on the trusted desert cooler to mitigate the heat. It blocked half the window, and the fan kept up a lulling drone as it churned out cool air. In the afternoons, it turned the room dim, a cove that smelt like rush matting and cuss or vetiver, a pleasing aroma that lingers as much within my recollections as it does more generally around the North Indian summer. I'll stop there.
Thank you. And Divrina's book actually has different chapters dedicated to these essential, what would you call them? Essential fragrances or?
I mean, yeah, they are, they're sort of, I've chosen to only go into 6 ingredients. And, you know, while I think that our own personal histories with fragrance are kind of important and inevitable, I have, you know, done my best to take these 6 ingredients and actually contextualize them in history, which is to say that, you know, we have, I have personal recollections that I've written about briefly in each chapter, but I think we have collective memories around fragrances like rose and jasmine or sandalwood, vetiver, and that these have actually been in use in India as fragrance, you know, starting from like 1st century BCE, because you find mentions of this starting in the Rig Veda, and then you go into the Arthashastra, and then you have like, you know, classical India, you have poetry, you have Sangam literature and poetry as well. And then of course you have the Mughals, and when you come there, then you have just a lot more documentation, a lot more very interesting anecdotes, a lot more use of perfume in the form that we use it today, because distillation comes to us from the Arabs via Persia and then into India. And so I have really just tried to touch upon history as well as document just how these harvests happen, how they've been continually happening in parts of India for centuries, just to travel there and see them, document them, and talk about them, introduce them to everyone.
Yeah, and I think one of the big surprises of the book for me certainly was when she talks about how ancient the use of these perfumes are, you know, and how they were used very much as part of a aspirational lifestyle or a luxurious lifestyle where, you know, they would be sent as bridal gifts, or they would be used as currency or exchange or gifts to royal personnel. So there's been a kind of very strong and long history of, as you call them, fragrances being considered really an important part of human civilization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we think of expensive perfume now as a luxury, and you know, but when we talk of traditional fragrance, which is rue and ether, or indeed of materials, you know, that they come from, like sandalwood or agarwood, these have always been luxurious, and they've always been used in a way to convey that sort of status and belonging, right. And that goes back very, very far.
So it's a very unusual book, because I don't think I've read anything on fragrance and perfume, links with our history, and also the very personal journeys that she makes to uncover and recover these fragrances. So now I'd like to ask each of these writers that when you've all read from your books, and they seem to be a very personal connect that has led you in this direction. So I want to ask you to talk a little bit about what is it that is driving you, motivating you, or what is it that you want to achieve in these research areas that you're going into by doing this work. Tabinda?
So I'd like to say that my work, my book, is not an academic piece as such. It's more of a personal, deeply personal memoir about my aunts. And I just feel that they were really amazing people. They were mothers, they were grandmothers, they were wives, but they just got on with life. And it's really sweet that they have got this book dedicated to them, and they would be very pleased if they were alive to see themselves being featured in this manner. and being written about. So I wanted to pay a personal tribute to them. And it all started with a telephone conversation, these days of WhatsApp, with my mother. And she had made something that day, and she said, oh, such and such aunt used to make it, and she made it so well. And then he said, okay, and that aunt made another thing, and that particular aunt made another thing. And I thought, let me collect them all together and present it like a book, so it'll be a legacy as well as something that the future generations, hopefully my daughters, hopefully my sister's daughters,
or even the sons and the
even the sons. Why not?
Yes,
We
let's
just
get the
have
men to
daughters,
cook a
but
little more.
yes, of course. So yes, that's what brought it about.
Right. So for you, it was like a personal return to a way of life, actually, that's fast vanishing, right?
It is fast vanishing.
Yeah. What about you, Tarana? What sort of...
So the connection between the vanishing culture or subculture was there, and I think with me also, but the root of my inspiration was Rampur, because I belong to Rampur, and when I came back to live in Rampur in 2010, and I was researching for my novel, that is Begum and the Dastan, and I was just walking through the old city, the old fort area of Rampur, and there were so many things that were uncared for and crumbling, and then I was working in the Raza Library, which is the biggest library of manuscripts in Asia. And then there's this person who just comes up to me. So I didn't want to be a food writer, and I was not so interested in cooking at all. Not so interested. I'm not at all interested in cooking, even though Rampur is all about food. So he just comes up and he says that, do you know there are Persian cookbooks at the Raza Library? I was really surprised. Persian cookbooks dating to 1816 to 1880s was something that I had not heard about. So because this guy was banned from accessing those cookbooks, so he says, why don't you try to get those manuscripts? So I just went to the library and I said, I want to see these manuscripts. And he says, do you know Persian? I said, no, I don't know Persian. Do you know what cooking is called in Persian? I said, I have no idea. So he said, it's called tam. And then he says, okay, just go, find something else to potter around in. But eventually I just did get those manuscripts, and I started translating them. And while I translated, I realized that there were so many kinds of pulaus and biryanis and kormas and kebabs. So what happened to the rest of them? And they were being cooked till, as I started talking to old-timers and collecting oral history, I was wondering what happened to all those 50 shades of pulaus. I mean, what happened? What occurred in between? And that became my inspiration. And I got this project. I was very lucky because initially I tried cooking them. The measurements were in dam, tola, and there were dots and dashes and notations and very cryptic kind of instructions. And the cooking techniques have changed, of course, since 1816 and 1880s. Of course, the cooking techniques have changed. I couldn't make sense of it. I was making a huge mess, but because of this project, I just got the resources. So I started working with the Khansamas of Rampur, who had some oral history, had heard about some of the dishes. They had some vague ideas. And so I was there with my translated recipes, and they were there with their idea of what should be done. And we kind of got together, and earning their trust took some time because I was very clear that you need to do this, and they said this is not going to taste very well, etc. Because you see, a lot of ingredients have now, our palates have totally changed, and really, for instance, they didn't use lal mirch initially, and they only used kali mirch. So then you had kormas which was looking very pale rather than that red korma that we are so fond of now. So eventually we did manage to revive about 40 dishes and present them at the food fest, which was this big aha moment for all of us. Right. So that has been a driving force, just putting Rampur back on the culinary map of India.
And are you still in touch with those khansamas? And are they continuing to make those dishes and those kormas?
Yes, so that is a very interesting question. Now, if there is no demand, I mean, how would people know that there is a pulao, a pineapple pulao, or there's a shabdeg that can, or an adrak halwa that can be cooked? So then we prepared a sort of a website, and I would urge you all to look at the rampurikhansama.com, in which we have the menus, all those forgotten dishes, as well as the well-known dishes, and the phone numbers and contact numbers of the khansamas. And they are getting orders. They cook anywhere in India, and I think they fall much cheaper than the others. After these two food
Anybody got a
festivals-
wedding coming up?
Amazing. I mean, you would, people have not heard of Rampur cuisine so much. It is completely different. There is a variation of korma, but these dishes need to be revived because they are a part of our, a subculture and a part of the identity of the place.
Yeah.
So they need to be tasted.
Sounds very exciting.
Yes, very much in touch with the khansamas all the time.
What about you, Divrina? What sort of drove you into this perfume project?
I'm just going to, before that, I said, tell you that I think 50 Shades of Pulao would be a great title for your
for a
next.
book, really,
Yeah.
really.
For me, I think, you know, I didn't, you know, I can't say I had like very much of a driving force. I think I was, you know, living very far from home when I first started thinking about fragrances off home. I mean, I think typically these things become more poignant when they're nowhere near you. And I was doing my master's, so I was, and I was also writing a lot at that time, completely unrelated. And then when I came back home, it was just something that stayed in my mind. I think it, you know, so it was really a combination of having a lot of curiosity for this, you know, of not just, you know, what are these smells? I mean, I have worked in fashion and beauty magazines for a very long time, most of my career. And when you come from that background, when you approach fragrance, you typically come to it from this, you know, the descriptions, the PR descriptions, and the descriptions that you have in the magazines or at the back of the bottle, which really are very opaque. They tell you nothing, and they're designed to be like that. They're just flowery. And so I was very curious about the stories behind it. You know, where are these ingredients coming from? What are the stories there? And so I think I was just really curious, and I had enough time, you know, and no job for a while, so that helps. To then begin doing some exploration, because I really did it in this very meandering fashion. I had no idea that I was going to write a book. I certainly did not think I had, you know, any knowledge to impart. I just wanted to learn, and I think that helped me, because also when I began doing the research of going to places and like calling up people and then really like imposing myself and saying, can I come and see your harvest and when is it happening? Because I knew nothing or almost nothing, I had no fear of like asking really basic, some quite idiotic questions. You know, I didn't have that problem. I didn't have an ego about it, and that helped me a lot. And so I think it was just, you know, the motivation was just to learn and a curiosity, and then it just kind of went from there. You know, you sort of go down a rabbit hole, you just keep following it. Yeah.
Yeah. And quite driven, I have to say. You might have been meandering, but you persisted, went into some very strange places and far away, long and comfortable journeys.
Those were really the fun parts. But I think, and I'll agree with Tarana here, that once you what did become apparent to me was that I think it's also necessary to document some of these things, because like you said, we have like such a wealth of heritage, of craft, of you know, traditions that have come to us, and that we're really quite blasé about it. So we don't, you know, often these things aren't observed or documented. And so, you know, once I began doing it, I thought, okay, well, you know, maybe I'll kind of write it down.
Yeah. It's turned into a lovely book. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
The Perfume Project. So get ready to ask questions if you have any. And there's just, while you're thinking of your first question and while the mic is being got ready, one of the things that struck me in reading through your books was that, you know, we often are concerned about questions. Right now it comes up a lot about authenticity, purity, what is originally from here, what is not, you know, does not belong originally. And yet in each of your books, in different ways, without trying to preach anything, what comes through very beautifully is how different kinds of influences, ideas, and people intermingling have created different, you know, sort of beautiful things, whether it's food, whether it's perfumes. And how do you feel about that? Do you agree that there's been a lot of sort of different kinds of influences and winds and breezes that have come through and created something fresh and new? How do you feel? Or do you feel that these are very rooted and original things in themselves?
I'll say that, you know, I have chosen to write about the ingredients that are sort of rooted here because that really was my endeavor. But when it comes to fragrance, I mean, from where we started, you know, when you speak about traditional fragrance to where we are now and what we use is what we use now really, I think, has its roots more in France because that is the birthplace of modern perfumery. So when you talk about outside influences, that is the most obvious one. I sort of get drawn into these debates now, you know, pretty often about what is synthetic and what is natural, and so that is the other thing. But it's I think it's kind of an unnecessary dichotomy. If you look at perfume and how it's created, you have a palette of ingredients. Some of them are you know, of 100% natural origin, and some of them are indigenous to where you are, and others are not. And you can use them any which way you want in a lab.
Combining colors and notes.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a, you know, it's kind of a raging debate now because you have this you know, return as you have in beauty and I'm sure in food as well, this insistence on coming back to what is natural and what is not. So, you know, it carries on, but I think it really just comes down to personal preference. These, you know, all of these things are totally subjective, and I think it's great that you have the options to be able to choose from.
Yeah. What about you? You want to comment on this at all?
Yes,
Yeah.
so as a food historian, authenticity is a very fraught term. We cannot believe that something or some dish, particularly in the concept of any authentic dishes, because you see food, flavors, ingredients are traveling across timelines.
Hold it closer, yeah.
Okay, so food and flavors and ingredients travel across timelines, and they mix through the interaction with the local communities. For instance, in this book, Forgotten Foods, we have this Pangal cuisine of Manipur. I didn't even know there was a Pangal community of Muslims. And they have borrowed from the local Metis community, which is so much in the headlines these days, and the Muslim community intertwining and kind of creating something that is called Eromba. Or the Mapala cuisine of Kerala. Once again, we living in the north just think that life is all about korma, pulao and kebab. But that Mapala cuisine has the intermingling of Portuguese and the Muslim cuisine. So there's something called mutta mala, which is like an egg necklace, which I tried my best to create but couldn't. So authenticity is not something that, as a historian, one would say that, okay, yeah, this is authentic. However, I would say that khichdi is one thing that is truly an Indian thing. There are, of course, the temple prasad, the ancient manuscripts talk about the kheer being there, but then kheer, porridge kind of a thing was there all over the world, but the khichdi concept was something that was remarked upon by the Muslims who first came over here, that what kind of people are these? They are mixing pulses and rice and they are eating it. So I don't really believe in authenticity, and I do believe there's been tremendous amount of amalgamations throughout history and will continue to be.
Yeah. What about, you want to add anything? Meanwhile, anybody got questions? Yes, I can see a hand up. So let him get the mic, and while Tabinda, why don't you see if you want to add something?
I would say that authenticity was one of the really important things for me, because I was recreating these dishes, and sadly there were no recipe books like Tarana had access to. Nobody wrote down any recipes, so I was just, there was a lot of trial and error going on in my kitchen to get things absolutely spot on. But I think once you know what it tastes like, you can sort of go backwards and recreate that.
Yeah.
But there are no air fryer recipes or any microwave recipes in my book. So it's all, the cooking methods are very, very authentic.
The way they were when your aunts were doing
Would
them.
do that.
We have a question.
Yeah, hi. I'm Kunal. So I have two questions. One is food and one is fragrance related. So first of all, like you mentioned 50 shades of pulao and all. So any particular shade that intrigued you the most in terms of its ingredient or something else? Any particular shade that interested you the most in terms of its ingredient or something like that? And you know, in your journey of discovering so many different variety of fragrances, anything that you know it has become your favorite in terms of the fragrance?
So see, when I was talking about the various kinds of pulaus, now we always think that you know, we kind of interchangeably think that pulao and biryani is the same. Now what I saw in those recipe books, like for instance there was imli pulao, there was something called coco pulao, which is like kind of an omelette with pulao. There's a samosa pulao with little samosas on top, which I think is an excellent concept, and some restaurants is going to pick it up and run away with it. And also using the vegetables of the season into the pulao, using pineapple pulao, aam pulao. In the book Forgotten Foods, there is a Yarkandi pulao, which has all the ingredients which were amalgamated into the pulao through the silk route. You see, so there were certain dried fruits and dried berries that are there in the Yarkandi pulao. So there are various kinds of pulao that have just, because you see, recipes will change and there'll be variations. It is like the flow of life itself. And we will continue to crave for the flavors that our tongues are used to. And but I'm so happy that people now have this adventurism, the culinary adventurism. They want to taste other foods. Make it your own, and then you will make those people your own also.
To answer your question about, but first of all, it's not hundreds of fragrances that I discovered, they're just 6. But from within that, you know, I think my favorite one to write about was oud, because it is absolutely not my favorite to smell, and I don't think it will be anybody's. It's one of those that it can, in the beginning is quite it can be quite challenging. It's an acquired taste, but it was, you know, one of the best stories, just in terms of where the oil comes from. You have the agar tree, and this is, by the way, historically, you know, native to Assam and to the northeast. And so that's where I was, in Assam, you know, in someone's backyard, looking at their trees and discovering that the oil, this, you know, in oud is, I mean, it's fantastically expensive. Like, all of these ingredients cost much more than gold. It's really expensive. And that the oil is actually comes from a tree, and for it to be the right tree, it needs to have been infected by a very particular insect, a borer insect, which is, you know, a parasitic mold, essentially. And that's going to infect the tree, and when it does that, the defense mechanism of the tree is to produce these volatile essential oils and to form a resin on itself as protection. And you will see the infected tree is, you know, the bark getting black in strips. So the tree is kind of dying, the canopy is dead, the bark is turning black, and it is this dead tree which is, or dying one, which is the most valuable. And for me, that was just like, it was quite crazy, you know, so that was my favorite chapter to research and write.
Sounds deeply poetic. We have time for one more question. Yes.
Good evening to all, and it's a real pleasure and privilege to be here this evening. So my question to all the authors actually, like in today we are seeing so many wars, but there is no war regarding to food. When it comes to food, there is no boundary actually. We all love to eat, be it continental, be it Mughlai, be it colonial.
Can you ask your question? We're running out of time.
Yeah. The question is that, is it true that there is no hatred when it comes to food? There is no boundary when it comes to food. It's only love and sense of belonging.
I wish that were true. Does anybody want to answer that?
Yes, you're very right. There are no boundaries to food, because as long as people are flowing, manpower is flowing across boundaries, there will be amalgamations, there'll be variations of dishes. Everything that you have on your plate today has traveled a long way to get to your plate and to become yours. And those flavors you have accepted, and I think it's important to accept other people also in the same way.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to
Thank you
Divrina,
so much.
Tarana, Tabinda, and thank you very much for being such a great audience and for your questions. So we will now bring this session to a close. Thank you.